Preocupado el presidente anaranjado, viendo que las elecciones las perdió.
Solicita a los que le hacen los mandados que se apuren pues la fiesta terminó.
Y mirando que se va a acabar el varo,
han formado un titingo. Se han negado a abandonar la Casa Blanca, a la silla del despacho se amarró. Los pelitos que le quedan los arranca, pataleando por la rabia que le dio. Y mirando a Cuba con sus patas blancas, de cabeza se tiró.
El que tenga confusión que se confunda, el que quiera claridad que venga a ver.
La jugada no es compleja ni profunda, está claro cómo quieren proceder.
Solo falta que nosotros nos dejemos,
y eso no va a suceder.
con la conga de los hoyos no te metas.
Cuba viva sin que nadie la someta. Mi tierra linda, mi cubanía, mi bandera se respeta. De La Habana para Santiago, defiende lo tuyo, cubano.
que no te metas con mi tierra, que mi Cuba se respeta.
Soy el mambí que aún vive con el machete en la mano. No, 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 no. ¿Qué me importa si comentas?
De donde vengo yo, estamos listos para la contienda.
Hello and happy Friday, comrades, friends, community, everyone who is tuned in and is watching today. You are tuned into Revolution Within the Revolution. We are a show of the National Network on Cuba. For those of you who don't know, the National Network on Cuba is a network of multiple different organizations around the country that are dedicated to doing Cuba solidarity work. And this show is basically the information, the propaganda outlet of our network to let you know what is happening in the movement, to let you know news updates on Cuba. And we are here every single Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you all who have tuned in. Please, please, please share the link, subscribe so that you can get all of the notifications for whenever we have a show. We want to ensure that we are building our own media outlets, that we are building our own sources of information, because the empire is constantly lying to us in their popular media streams, right? We cannot trust the CNNs and the Fox Newses and the whatever else is. We have to be able to be the voice of our own people. And so that is exactly what we're doing with this show here today. So again, please like, subscribe, share it with your friends, share with your comrades. And today we have an incredible episode. We are going to be talking all about Black August. We're going to go a little bit into some of the history around Black August, what exactly the principles of Black August are, and what it means to build discipline all throughout the month of August as revolutionary organizers. So we're going to have a guest who's going to join us here in a little bit, and we're going to discuss some more of that. But before that, before every single show, we like to first and foremost acknowledge that President Maduro is still held behind bars, right? President Maduro and first combatant Cilia Flores, they were kidnapped from their country. They were taken by the sham of a country, which the United States is, and put behind bars in New York, and are still, to this day, being held by in New York by the United States. And so we say, free President Maduro, free first combatant Cilia Flores, and an end to the attacks on Venezuela. We demand a fully sovereign Venezuela, for them to be able to choose their own dignity, choose their own political destiny, and for the US to get their vampire hands off of the Caribbean. So yeah, free Maduro. And of course, before that, before we get into the rest of our program, we like to discuss a little bit about Cuban history. Every single Friday when we do the show, we want to discuss, what are some significant moments that have happened throughout the revolution, throughout Cuban, history that is kind of important for us to know as people who are developing ourselves. And so today is not necessarily the most momentous day, but yesterday was, because yesterday was Comandante Fidel Castro's birthday. Comandante Fidel turned 100 years old. Though he had passed, right, his legacy is still alive and well, and that legacy turned 100 this year. This is his centennial year. People all over the world commemorated, recognized, and celebrated the legacy of the comandante. Even though the comandante was very, very humble, he was a humble man who didn't want to be recognized as a hero, right? Which is why in Cuba, there's no streets named after him, there's no busts or statues of him. He wanted to be recognized as one with the people. But people all over the world were still very deeply inspired by Fidel Castro's leadership, by his ability to analyze our material conditions and demand that we need to change them. So yesterday, Comandante turned 100, and every single day in our movements, not just in the Cuba Solidarity Movement, but in every single front of struggle, we say, long live Fidel, and long live the Cuban Revolution that he was able to materialize in the real world. We are celebrating him every single day, not just on his birthday. And anybody who is dedicated to struggle, whether that struggle be anti-racist struggle, gender oppressed struggles, anti-imperialist struggles, the struggle for housing, the struggle for healthcare, whatever it may be, everybody has something to learn about Fidel Castro and his legacy. So we say happy birthday, Fidel. And as many of you know, right now there are many activists, not just from our own network, but around the world, who are in Cuba because they are celebrating Comandante Fidel's centennial. So Cuba held a huge conference, which is where this picture comes from, of these activists a couple of days ago, celebrating the life and legacy of Fidel. We have many people who are on the Centennial of Fidel Brigade from America who are currently there that were represented, as well as people from Australia, people from Africa, people from Asian countries, people all over South America. So many people were there in Cuba this past week to celebrate Comandante Fidel. So I would encourage everybody to go and watch the live stream footage that was taken of this conference. There were some really incredible, powerful moments from, President Diaz-Canel, from different leaders of the revolution. And I think the message of this conference was very clear, right? It was clear that, they urge all of us to not just remember Fidel, but also to continue living his demands every single day, living what it is that he wanted of us, which was to continue developing our own revolutionary fervor, right? This is perhaps a moment where the Yankees, the empire, the capitalists, the vampires are attacking our people, attacking oppressed nations more than ever. And so we should not just study Fidel and remember his legacy and remember what he has done for the Cuban people, but also take those lessons and apply them to our own conditions. And remember that our fight is still far from over. We still have a huge battle that we have to beat. And I myself, shamelessly, I'm coming to you from the heart of the belly of the beast, Washington, D.C. And I myself recognize that I have a duty here, you all have a duty, and everybody who is dedicated to remembering Fidel, remembering the Cuban Revolution, and being a part of struggle has a duty to put his principles into practice. Now, one of those principles, of course, was the struggle for Black liberation, right? There is a long, long history between the Cuban Revolution and Black liberation movements in the US. And today we have a very special guest, one of my good comrades, Nia, who is also from the Action for Cuba committees, that we want to welcome onto the show. Let's see if we can get her on. Hey, comrade, how's it going?
Hola, compa. It is going so well. Very thankful for this Friday and this opportunity to be on this show with you. So excited and so very happy to connect and teach and learn alongside you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, welcome to the show. This is your first time on Revolution within the Revolution, probably not the last. And your skin is glowing, your teeth are pearly white, you're looking beautiful, you're looking gorgeous, compa. So thanks for joining us. So, Comrade, tell the people a little bit about yourself, the work you're engaged in, and what it is that you do with the Action for Cuba committees.
Yes. So, hi everyone. I'm Nia. Pronouns she, her, ella. I am actually a scholar, organizer, a PhD candidate and researcher at the University of Michigan, studying higher education, institutional and political repression, campus activism, free speech, race, and anti Blackness. And I'm also an organizer. Working and organizing within the Action for Cuba committees here based in Michigan through my organization, my community organizations, community movement builders, and all African People's Revolutionary Party. And I serve as the national campus organizing lead for the National Network on Cuba and the No War on Cuba campaign here in the US. So that's kind of an overview of like who I am, what I do. And I've traveled to Cuba with you, I think at this point, twice. So have been in that struggle and been able to share space with you and our other comrades actually on the island to have these conversations.
Awesome. Super cool. Yeah, Comrade Nia and I have been to Cuba twice together now. I think we actually met each other in Cuba.
Yes.
Um, and it was the past 2 years that we've been to Cuba together, 2025 and 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Both years of which, Cuba had faced some unique challenges. It was really funny. This past year, 2026, when we were there is when Trump had kind of introduced these escalated attacks on Cuba, right? It was literally while we were there in May Day. And so it was very interesting to see those contradictions and repression grow as we were literally there on the island.
Yes.
So Comrade, the reason I brought you on today is because we are currently in the time of Black August, right? This is a moment for us where we grow our disciplines, revolutionaries. We understand, the principles of what it means for us to be in a fighting movement and dedicate ourselves to an actual fighting struggle to win our people's victory. So tell us a little bit, for those who don't know and who perhaps are new to the concept of Black August, tell us a little bit about what Black August is and how exactly this observance came to be and came to fruition.
Yes. So a lot of my political work is really grounded in trying to understand the relationship between what happens to Black people here in the United States and what the United States does throughout the world. And since I study higher education, I kind of use that context of the university as a microcosm of the greater society. And so I look at how the same state that has historically surveilled, incarcerated, infiltrated, and repressed Black liberation movements domestically has also waged wars, orchestrated coups, and imposed blockades and supported counter-revolution abroad. And the first thing I would emphasize is that Black August comes directly out of the Black radical prison movement. So it's not simply just another Black History Commemoration Month. It's not supposed to be symbolic and detached from struggle. It actually grew out of the political struggle inside California prisons in the 1970s, and specifically out of the lives and deaths of Black revolutionaries like George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, W.L. Nolan, William Christmas, James McLean, and so many others. And so Jonathan Jackson, who was actually the little brother of George Jackson, was killed on August 7th of 1970 during the Marin County Courthouse Rebellion, which sought to free the Soledad brothers, which included his older brother, George. And then a year and 2 weeks later, on August 21st, 1971, George Jackson was killed at San Quentin Prison. And so what I think about is incredibly important about this is that George Jackson wasn't simply somebody who happened to become politically conscious while incarcerated. He actually became one of the major revolutionary theorists of his generation and ours from inside a prison. And so I think that completely disrupts this liberal idea that prisons are places where politically irrelevant or socially disposable people are stored. George understood prisons as political institutions, and he understood that Black incarceration as inseparable from capitalism, racism, and imperialism. And so that's incredibly important for understanding Black August. And the practices that we associate with Black August, including fasting, political study, discipline, remembrance, physical training, and recommitment to struggle, come out of this tradition. And so when we summarize Black August as this phrase of study, fast, train, fight. It's a theory of revolutionary discipline, and it says that remembrance should transform how we live. So that's a bit of a little overview of Black August and how it came to be.
And what's, something that Comrade Mia mentioned, which was really great, was the principles of Black August, which was, fast, study, train, fight. These are principles that George Jackson had literally, while he was behind the prison bars, said, I'm practicing these myself, and I'm urging fellow prisoners to practice because I want us to be able to grow our revolutionary fervor, right?
Absolutely.
I want us to be able to grow our revolutionary discipline, which I think is an incredibly important part of the history behind Black August.
Mhm.
So tell us, okay, so the revolutionaries that you mentioned, right? You mentioned quite a few. You mentioned George Jackson, his younger brother, Jonathan Jackson.
Yes.
For those of you, maybe who aren't familiar, the events that Comrade Mia mentioned with the courthouse incident, that was actually what ultimately then ended up leading to the witch hunts against Angela Davis, who was then, of course, also a huge solidarity activist with Cuba and had visited Cuba, had been friends with Vilma and Fidel.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about these connections between Black August, these Black liberation fighters, and the Cuban Revolution.
Yes. And so thinking about like where Cuba comes into play in this history, it becomes clear when we understand that George Jackson and the radical prison movement did not understand Black incarceration as an isolated American social problem, right? They increasingly understood themselves as a part of a global anti-colonial struggle, which really emphasizes this concept of internationalism, that our struggles here in America, where we're at, they are not isolated from the struggles and the oppression of those around the world. And Orsanmi Burton talks about in his book Tip of the Spear, which hopefully there are free copies, PDF copies of this, but please get it if y'all are able to. He really talks about some extraordinary evidence around this of like prisoners in Attica were discussing the United Nations. They were discussing seeking recognition under the Geneva Conventions. And some incarcerated people even sought political asylum in socialist countries like Cuba, like North Vietnam, North Korea. And so these are things that are really telling us that the prison movement was internationalist. The people who the United States called criminals were increasingly understanding themselves as political captives fighting inside the borders of an imperial power. And Cuba existed in their political imagination as one of the places where revolutionary people could potentially find refuge. So Cuba represented more than just this island that fought for its freedom. It was a country that really fought and pushed out US imperialism. And it's so close, it being so close to the United States represents not only this idea around a physical threat, because to be honest, Cuba is a very small island of about 10 million people that does not even have the same military infrastructure that the United States does. But it represents an ideological threat to show and to represent what it means to fight for self-determination. And that's why Cuba itself shows up as a particular connection within Black August. It shows up as a symbol of internationalism, sacrifice, and discipline, and continues to advocate for political consciousness and political education. And that's why when you mentioned Fidel yesterday being his centenario, like we acknowledge that not only did Fidel and the revolution represent something bigger for Black people in this Black movement, and the liberation movement, but Fidel himself coming to America, coming to Harlem to visit and speak with Malcolm X, that itself is an image of connection of Cuba directly putting itself in line with the Black liberation struggle in the United States.
That's right. That's right. And I think a lot of people don't realize, during a time when the United States was providing refuge for Nazis, Cuba was providing refuge for these Black liberation fighters, right? Literally, as the United States was hunting them down and repressing every aspect of the Black liberation movement, these socialist countries around the world and communist movements around the world, period, had recognized these fighters as heroes, right? As heroes of the people. I mean, there was campaigns all over the world calling for the freedom of Assata Shakur, right?
Yes.
And when she passed, there were people everywhere in every corner of the globe remembering her legacy, remembering who she was as a Black liberation fighter.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about that, because I know that, Black August here, a lot of people don't know about it. It's not celebrated as like this national holiday in the mainstream American psyche. It's recognized as something that perhaps is only recognized among Black folks, right? Or it's only recognized among revolutionary folks. So tell us about these differences and how exactly this holiday is commemorated, and also how our heroes are so different compared to what it is like in Cuba and the heroes that the Cuban Revolution commemorates.
Yes. Yes. And so when thinking about and making this distinction, that Black August originated in the US, specifically inside California prisons and the prison movement. And its most developed ritual traditions are rooted here, right? So in the United States, Black August has historically meant things like our principles of fasting, political study, physical training, abstaining from intoxicants, studying revolutionary history, and recommitting ourselves to ongoing struggle. So I wouldn't describe Cuba as simply having reproduced the exact same Black August tradition. I think the more historically grounded way to understand Cuba's place in Black August is through revolutionary solidarity with the people Black August commemorates, and with the larger Black liberation struggle from which it emerged, right? And so I think there's direct evidence of this relationship, with Cuba, as you mentioned, becoming the home or refuge of different moments for Black revolutionaries. So including not only Assata Shakur, but also Robert F. Williams, and Black expatriate communities in Cuba communicating solidarity with US prisoners. And so after the Long Attica prison revolt, which is talked about in Burton's Tip of the Spear, that was actually inspired by George Jackson and his murder. um, Black folks actually left and expatriate and became expats in Cuba and had a Black American expat community in Cuba alongside Vietnamese revolutionaries, who communicated solidarity with folks who were still imprisoned here in the US. Black revolutionaries from the United States encountered African and third world movements in Cuba. And Cuba recognized people who the US government called criminals as political actors and as these political agents pushing for change. And so there's kind of a difference in thinking around between saying Cuba observes Black August exactly as we do, because I don't think they do. They don't have the similar or particular types of conditions that have created that born and work Black August was created out of. But they are saying, and I think we do say, Cuba belongs to this international political history that Black August asks us to remember, which I think is much stronger historically when thinking about this. So Cuba celebrates Black August by being this beacon of self determination, of continued struggle against US imperialism. And so that's where Cuba often shows up. And even with Assata Shakur, we can't talk about Cuba and political prisoners and Black liberation and revolutionary sanctuary without talking about Assata, because she's a literal embodiment of this relationship. She was a Black Panther, a member of the Black Liberation Army, who was imprisoned, who escaped prison, and eventually received this political asylum in Cuba. And so, because of that, Cuba became a haven for a fugitive to the United States government. And so, to many people in the Black liberation movement, Cuba provided sanctuary to someone that we all understood as a political prisoner fleeing political repression. And so those two interpretations, from the US government and I think from us in the Black liberation movement, but for those of us in these leftist liberation movements, really tell us everything about the political states, the political stakes. And it's emphasized in the Cuba report that you also talked about on here a couple weeks ago that came out under Narco Rubio in the State Department. That current report dedicates so much substantial attention to Assata and other Black revolutionaries and their presence in Cuba, representing something bigger than one individual. And it represents Cuba's refusal to automatically accept the US state's designation of Black revolutionaries as ordinary criminals. And that gets us to understanding that there's a difference between when we talk about political prisoners and who they are, and thinking around this crucial distinction between somebody just violating a law for individual benefit, or someone violating or being accused of violating the law in relation to a collective struggle against oppression. And so I think the state tries to collapse those categories, and which I think Black August refuses to do. And so those connections between Cuba and Black resistance in the US, it's really connected around these ideals around self determination, internationalism, political education, and repression. There's so many connections, and really wanting to highlight the emphasis that Cuba really stands as this beacon and this sanctuary for Black folks, but also all third world communities here within the belly of the beast and around the world, as a beacon of strength and continued struggle against US and European imperialism.
That's right. That's right. And you touched on this a little bit, but when it comes to Cuba's internationalism, perhaps the biggest example has been their material support for African liberation movements, right? For those who aren't familiar, tell them a little bit about how exactly Cuba has been perhaps one of the biggest supporters of Africa, right? And how exactly that relates to August. I know many Black revolutionaries have spoken about this.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more about their sentiments and Africa and Cuba's connections.
Yes, yes. So for me, the connection is that internationalism, that sacrifice, discipline, and really the understanding that liberation cannot stop at national borders. And so that's something that Black August teaches us is that we inherit obligations from those who struggled before us. And so that is what we mean that when we say we are our ancestors, we do take up those struggles that they had and push against them in similar or updated ways. And so we don't simply just memorialize George Jackson or these other political prisoners. We're really thinking about and asking what was George and these other political prisoners fighting? What conditions produced these political prisoners? What remains unfinished? And Cuban internationalism really operated from a very similar premise that a revolution which only defended itself um, and ignored oppressed peoples elsewhere would be incomplete. And so that's why, um, and that's where I see Cuba's relationship with Africa mattering so deeply, because it wasn't rhetorical solidarity with African independence movements. Cuba materially supported struggles against Portuguese colonialism and white minority rule, and eventually sent enormous numbers of Cuban personnel to Africa. And one of the things I want us to remember is that Cuba understood its relationship to Africa partly through Cuba's own African history, y'all. Cuba itself is a Caribbean nation profoundly shaped by the same transatlantic slave trade that we experience and by people of African descent. And so when Cubans went to Angola, for example, this wasn't simply Europeans or outsiders deciding to rescue Africans. Thousands upon thousands of those Cubans themselves were Afro-Cubano or Afro-Cubana. And there's a diasporic dimension to that struggle. And thinking around one of the most significant examples is Cuba's intervention in Angola beginning in 1975 in support of the government against these forces backed by apartheid South Africa and covertly, as we see with the United States. And so that struggle became part of this chain of events that transformed Southern Africa. And the political significance of that is it's enormous because apartheid South Africa was not simply just a domestic racial regime, it was one component of a larger imperial architecture in Southern Africa. And so Cuba's participation in Angola connects directly to the principle underlying Black August that you do not become free by accepting oppression somewhere else. Internationalism actually means recognizing that my liberation is bound up with yours. And so I think that's kind of like where Cuba really falls in thinking around their connection to Africa and how they show up and what internationalist struggle really means.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. That was great. And I think so the first time that I heard President Diaz-Canel speak in person, right? He said
Yes.
something so moving, which was our roots in Cuba are in Africa, right? He said that. And when I heard him say it, I was like, wow, this is a president of a nation saying this. I could not believe my ears. And so, because I mean, can you imagine Trump saying such a thing or Biden saying such a thing? I mean, it's
No.
so very clear that Cuba's lifeblood, right? Its veins, its roots as a country are internationalist.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's also why the Cuban Revolution has inspired so many people, right? It's because
Mhm.
they not only stood up against the Batista dictator, right, and were victorious, But they also decided to use that victory to say, hey, this is possible for oppressed people everywhere in every corner of the world. And I think that's why so many people go to Cuba every single year, and so many people still to this day praise the Cuban Revolution as, um, an inspiration, something that we look up to, something that, we don't just put Shay on our walls and our t-shirts because it's trendy to do so, but we do it because it reminds us that we do need to struggle and we do need to fight and we do need to fast. And in fact, we do need to be victorious for our people.
Absolutely.
And so I think another thing people don't realize, right? And you also touched on this a little bit is one of the oppressed nations that we are talking about is, in fact, the Black nation here in the United States, right? It's the nation of oppressed people who are facing white supremacy and the war against Black people right here in the US.
Mhm.
And one thing a lot of people don't know is that there has been many instances where Cuba has actually tried to provide support to oppressed Black people in the US. One of the most notorious was, of course, during Hurricane Katrina, right? If you didn't know, you should know the vast majority of those who were victimized by this hurricane were, in fact, Black folks, right, who lived in New Orleans. And Cuba said, we're going to provide you medical support. We're going to provide you aid. And we're going to do it free of charge because we recognize, the humanity of our fellow neighbors. And George Bush during this time said, absolutely not, right? He literally rejected Cuba's help during this time. So tell us a little bit about the connections that can be made and the lessons that can be learned between Cuba and the Black liberation fight today, right? Because it's still a struggle. It is still something that people need to be in the streets for, need to be fighting for to this day. It is not something of the past. It is not something that we left in 2020, right? It's something that people need to be dedicated to every single day until Black liberation is won, until the advancement of Black people, oppressed people, working class people is ultimately victorious in the United States. So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about those connections and the lessons that can be learned.
Yes. And so I'm thinking so much like that comes to mind with that State Department Cuba report, and how insulting it is to for it to claim that Cuba is the sole reason for Black and other leftist movements in this country, as if Jim Crow didn't exist, as if slavery didn't exist, as if oppression or um, poverty and exploitation didn't exist, when it was all something that was, I think, existed already. And with that, I think we look at and want to emphasize and really reject this idea that there is American exceptionalism, that what came out of the United States is this, it's simply an imperfect democracy gradually expanding freedom. Because it doesn't. I think I've going through this history, I've had to confront slavery, colonialism, racial terror, Jim Crow, policing, COINTELPRO, and then studying Cuba, Congo, Vietnam, confronting this other side of the same history of U.S. military intervention, coups, counterinsurgency, and sanctions. I think we really need to connect this struggle of really understanding that Cuba did not teach Black people that white supremacy existed. It didn't invent slavery. Cuba did not invent Jim Crow. It did not create lynching, didn't create redlining. Cuba didn't create segregated schools or racial capitalism or police brutality. And Cuba did not create prisons or the conditions that produced Watts, Detroit, Newark, Ferguson, Baltimore, or Minneapolis. Cuba certainly did not create the centuries-long Black radical tradition. Black people were resisting slavery before Marx was even born. Gabriel Prosser didn't need Havana to tell him he was oppressed. Nat Turner didn't need foreign propaganda to know that he was enslaved. Harriet Tubman didn't need Cuban intelligence. Marcus Garvey didn't need Fidel Castro. W.E.B. Du Bois didn't need Havana to recognize imperialism. Claudia Jones didn't need Fidel. Paul Robeson didn't need to talk to Fidel or those things. Black radicalism has always had its own historical development, and it came from US oppression, racial exploitation, and segregation. And when thinking about what this tradition means and what I think we want to look at and really highlight is that our repression is shared. Our liberation must be shared too. And so one of the lines from the various Cuba solidarity pledges that have come out, and particularly one that came out, I think, yesterday with Black Alliance for Peace, that they wrote with us in the National Network on Cuba, that I think really captures this moment is the idea that our oppression is shared, and so our liberation must be too. And that's not just rhetoric for me, and I know it's not for you and our comrades around us. It's an organizing principle. And so those forces that are imposing economic warfare on Cuba right now are connected to the forces militarizing our borders and militarizing our community. And the institutions repressing anti-war movements overlap with those repressing Black radical movements. And the logics used to criminalize Palestine solidarity resembled those historically used to criminalize Black nationalism. And so the language, it really changes this these ideas around communists, around extremists, terrorists, foreign agents, outside agitators. But the political work that language performs is remarkably stable. It separates movements from the people, and it really delegitimizes grievances. And it really transforms political dissent into the security problem, which I think that Cuba and Fidel, and remembering his centenary, really want us to push back against. That it is an honor to be looked at by the United States as an enemy. We cannot be looked at as connectors or agents of US imperialism. That's not something that serves us. It goes against that. And really, what Black August wants to highlight and understand and push forward is that more than just the skin color of Black folks that makes us and ties us together, it is the political imagination and the political Blackness that we find that Cuba shares. This overarching connection between not only with people where we're at, but with people beyond our borders. And so Cuba really stands as a pillar within Black August to continue to show that Cuba has shown up for us. So it is time to show up for them. And it always has been time. And despite that reciprocal nature that we continue to have with Cuba, it is our duty and our obligation to be committed to movements outside of our national borders, and to be invested and to be obligated to be adherent to our communities abroad. We identify more with the people of Cuba than we do with the rich bourgeoisie class of the US. We have to see that, and we have to understand that, because that is what's pushing forward not only the blockade and the sanctions, but also our own oppression here, not only for us as Black folks, but our trans comrades, our LGBTQ plus comrades, our comrades being detained by ICE. They're all working under the same infrastructure to separate us.
That's correct. And of course, yesterday during Black August was Comandante Fidel's birthday, right? His centennial, 100, Comandante turned 100.
Yes.
Tell us, from your visits to Cuba as a brigadista these past couple of years, what do you want people to take away from Comandante's legacy? I mean, this is his 100th year, right? What should people know about Fidel? What should people understand that you learned about Fidel when you were on the island? Let the people know.
Oh my goodness. And yeah, because yesterday was Fidel's 100th birthday, I think it's so worth reflecting on why Fidel continues to generate this like intense political feeling for many people like committed to this existing political order that we in, this existing imperial social order. Fidel really represents defiance. um, and for us colonized and oppressed peoples, particularly during the 20th century, but even now during the 21st, he represented the possibility that US domination could be resisted. And so that doesn't require us to think about or make any historical figure infallible, because we understand that with revolutionary study, it should never abandon critical thought. But there's a reason that Fidel could walk into Harlem in 1960 and be greeted by Black people who recognized Cuba's struggle as connected to their own. And so there's a reason Malcolm met him. There's a reason Robert Williams found refuge in Cuba. And Fidel is the reason that Radio Free Dixie, the Black revolutionary radio show that Robert F. Williams created in Cuba, existed. There's a reason Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture spoke in Cuba. Asada lived there. Um, we really want to highlight that Fidel was a lover of the people and push that forward. And something that we saw when we visited the Fidel Castro Center. And mind you, Fidel said himself that he wants no particular faces or recognition of him being lined up across the country, because he wants the focus to be on the people. But that center was created not really to be a refuge or a place to commemorate him as a person per se, but him as a concept. Him as a concept of the Cuban Revolution. We have to acknowledge the fact that the Cuban Revolution would not be what it is without Fidel Castro, Comandante. That is an acknowledgement. And understanding that he was not the only one to bring the revolution together, but he's such a significant portion. And without the things that he went through to get to the revolutionary ideals that he did, it would not have come into fruition. And he acknowledges he's not the only one that was reading Marx, that was reading Lenin, that was doing this study. He did it alongside other people, but it had to be him in a particular way. And so Fidel doesn't represent just this like mythical being or this figure that needs to be put on a pedestal for us to admire or worship. He represents a broader struggle for solidarity and unity, and he pushes that forward. And I think that was one of the greatest things to learn and to see that that mentality is pushed through not only Fidel or Raul, but also through the people. Um, and the president of Cuba, Miguel, he Diaz Canal, like he says the things that he says about solidarity and unity and connecting our struggles to Africa, and also at the same time dropping quotes from Malcolm X in the US. That is a shared mentality of the Cuban people to connect to one another, to connect to the world. And that is all Cuba wants to do, to be and to connect to the world. So I think that's what Fidel represents. The 100 years of his birth represents an opportunity for us to reflect and an opportunity for us to continue organizing for this broader dream of a better world, because that is what Cuba represents, this idea that we can have a better world without imperialism and colonialism and oppression. And that scares the US.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And it's also important to know that Comandante Fidel had 600 plus assassination attempts by the US empire put up against him, and he surpassed every single one. So if Comandante Fidel was not scared of the Yankee Empire that was literally trying to kill him 600 times, then neither should we be, right? Um,
Yes.
so I think that's another lesson is fearlessness.
Yes.
So on a personal note, what are you doing to observe Black August? Tell us about your Black August routine and what you have set for yourself.
Oh my goodness. So in community movement builders, we we have a monthly book club. Our book of the month, like many others, is Blood in My Eye by Comrade George Jackson. We are doing a daily read along for our members every day at 12 p.m. Eastern. We get on Zoom from 12 to 12:30 and read through the book. And next week we'll have our book club meeting just to go through all of the lessons that we learned in the book and what does it mean. We also have our calisthenics and workout regimen for us to do to physically train, get us ready to fight. We really want to highlight that this is not only a political struggle or political war that we're going on. It is a physical and a spiritual one. So really connecting that and also being in spaces with other comrades like you and like so many others having these conversations. So really trying to take up the mantle of studying, fasting, training, and fighting. What does that mean? Fighting not only physically, but also fighting every single day to resist imperialism and to resist the liberalism to just fall into complacency and to never be comfortable. And so, yeah, little by little, every day, doing something to just resist is how I'm showing up.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. All right. Well, Kamarania, where can people find you and the organizations you mentioned on socials?
Yes. Okay. So I am on socials at Nia D Hall, my first and last name and middle name D, middle initial D, and then we are on social media with the National Network on Cuba, obviously at National Network on Cuba, Michigan Action for Cuba on Instagram, Community Movement Builders on Instagram, and All African People's Revolutionary Party on Instagram. So we are all there and we have connected at some point with the National Network on Cuba Instagram page. So if y'all are following that, you can obviously find us through there as well. But yeah, that's where we're at and where we are.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you, compa, for joining Revolution Within the Revolution. Everybody, as Comrade Nia said, study, train, fast, fight, right? We appreciate you for bringing your analysis, your historical grounding. Yeah, compa, we hope to see you on the show again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Awesome, awesome. And that was Comrade Nia. Thank you for her for joining us again. And before we close out today's show, we have a couple of network updates. Firstly, we will be having a strategy session that is coming up soon. So please, please, please look out for it. It will be coming out at the end of this month. We will be posting that on our social medias. So look out for that. We are also, like we mentioned and announced in last show, hosting our 301 political education series. That will be announced in September. For those of you who missed our 101 and 201, 301 is going to be just as in-depth, just as developed and just as incredible as the last two sessions. So please look out for our first session, which will be announced in September. We're going to be talking about the history of the Cuban Revolution, what we can learn from it, and essentially going more in depth into these topics. So please join our 301 session. And of course, comrades, that is the end of today's show. Please join us next week as we talk about the Centennial of Fidel Brigade. We will be joined by our co-host Onye, who's going to be joining the show and coming back from Cuba. She's going to be reporting on what the brigade was like, what they talked about, and some more in-depth discussion about the Centennial of Fidel Brigade. So please join us again next week at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we will see you all then. Viva Cuba, viva la revolución.
Nadie tiene miedo, tú conmigo no te metas. Oh, no. Hey. Oye, eso que mi alegría te molesta.